Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my warm welcome to speakers who are sitting wide across from Australia to Bangladesh to Sri Lanka, Nepal, India. So it's really, one can say that across Pacific conference. Now, as you know that today we are discussing COVID-19 and regional response. I know I have a galaxy of speakers with us, but what I wanted to say that looking at a pandemic, of course, we know pandemic can't be tackled or dealt by any single country or by any single state. So mere the nomenclature pandemic, it indicates the importance of regional collaboration across countries. But when I look at South Asia and South Asian response to pandemic, there are at least two important things which come into my mind. The first is that perhaps this pandemic that would bring some sort of change in our mindset. We in South Asia have been thinking of security in a physical security context. So for us, security was threat either within or across borders, and this pandemic has told us that there are other forms of insecurities as well, and especially the health insecurity, the whole bacterial and virus pandemic insecurities, and food insecurity, climate change insecurity. So I'm quite optimistic that in this after COVID world in which we would be living, perhaps the policymakers and the thinkers, they would also think of other sorts of securities and insecurities and the importance of them. And of course, in South Asia, which has only last week we launched UNESCAP's their survey, socio-economic survey for 2020. So the survey revealed that it was only less than 3% which was being spent on social protection in South Asia, and even less on health when we look at the overall average figures. So I'm hopeful that this pandemic that would bring this the attention of the policymaker on sustainable development goals, on social sector development, and why it is important to build resilience and build capacities of states to deal with these non-traditional security threats. The second thing which comes in my mind, and it is about what is it that we can learn from each other, and there is a lot that South Asia, with South Asian neighbors, I think we can learn from each other. And it is not only about how to conduct the vaccination, how to do the trials, how to beef up our health system, but also about the debate which is now challenging all governments and all states, and it is balancing between lives and livelihoods. If you have an extended lockdown, of course it would save lives, but in the countries like South Asia, where more than 50% of our workforce is working in informal, undocumented, and these non-traditional sectors, whether that sort of extended lockdown can be bearable for livelihoods, and all the governments, they are facing with the challenge where to relax the lockdown and where to tighten it up. And I think the South Asian governments, we can learn from each other on this. The third thing that we can learn from each other is sustaining and keeping our food supply chains intact. I think South Asia, most of the South Asian countries, we depend on agriculture. Of course, Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka has a blue economy, and of course, again, the fish and the seafood is Sri Lanka is self-sufficient in it, if not in some of the cereals and grains. But looking at South Asia, again, agriculture, the food supply chain that is extremely important. And I keep on saying that money and the financial stimulus packages, those can't be a substitute for food. And for us, I think our lifeline is if we can keep our food supply chain intact, uninterrupted and smooth. So if from our rural areas or from the food, the primary sources of food production, if we can keep this supply chain intact to the end consumers sitting in urban conglomerates, I think this is something that would help in this COVID. And we need to learn from each other on this wheat harvesting protocols, on this fruit harvesting protocols, on this rice sowing techniques. So we are entering in a phase where the crops which were sown in winter, now those are being harvested, and the crops which are sown in summer, those sowing season is about to start, and we have to arrange for the inputs for those crops. And I think again we can learn from each other in the region. And the final point where I'll end, and I'll be looking forward to learn from our learned speakers today. It is about the regional trade and regional connectivity. Even if we have some sort of normalcy, I think in the new normal world after COVID, for the time being, perhaps until and unless we have some COVID safe protocols for international trade, cargo and shipment, and for some time when the airports and seaports, those would start functioning normally, I think we need to somehow rely on intra-regional trade. The connectivity that starts from Afghanistan to Pakistan, to India, to Bangladesh, to Nepal, to Bhutan, and then of course we also have Sri Lanka, and we have excellent sea linkages between Pakistan and Sri Lanka, and India and Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So we need to see that how we can have this intra-regional connectivity and intra-regional trade. If for time being our external trade that somehow stops working, that faces some sort of interruption. So what is the future of this sort of trade in the region? What is the future of SAARC in this pandemic? We have already seen this SAARC emergency fund, and this pandemic also gave an excuse for South Asian government to sit together and talk about it. So with every crisis, there is some sort of opportunity, and I think what we need to discuss today is what is the type of opportunities we are getting out of this crisis, and hopefully, if we are together, we can also somehow conquer on this pandemic, and we can do some joint medical investigations to think of some vaccination or think of some health protocols. To discuss all of these, I have a learned panel with us today. We have with us Mr. Saifullah Tai. He is a PhD candidate at Deccan University, Australia. We have Dr. Narinjan Sahu, who is a senior research fellow from Observer Research Foundation, India. We have Dr. Prakash Bhattari, who is president of Center for Social Change, Nepal. Professor Dr. Shaheen Akhtar from National Defense University, Pakistan. She would be joining us. We have Professor Rashid Titumir from Dhaka University. We have Professor Siri Hattich from Colombo University. We also have Dr. Anton Priyanthe, the Open University of Sri Lanka. And we also have Dr. Zahid from Australia University. So there's a full galaxy of panel. I'll request my colleague Aisha with the order that is already provided to her to conduct rest of the proceedings. once all panelists they will share their ideas with us, then we'll open the floor for question and answers. Over to you, Aisha.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. I'd now request Dr. Rashid Al Mahmood Titumir. He's a professor of economics in Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. He'll brief us on how Bangladesh is responding to COVID-19 and what can the SAARC countries, the South Asian country, expect from Bangladesh in the current scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abid Kaim Suleri, for inviting me to this panel. I'm sorry that I have to leave to another webinar, and I would be missing some of the panelists, and especially particularly to see some of you with whom I have worked in previous occasions. Anyway, I think none could be given a kind of a better accolade than SDPI. Sometimes I used to call it South Asian Development Policy Institute, because it has been always in its focus, particularly its development conferences, they have focused South Asia, and they are ardent supporter of having from turning this least integrated region to a integrated region with equality and with respect and for every nations. So, and in our parts, we have also been part of an initiative called Imagine a New South Asia. Unfortunately, that has not taken shape. Rather, we haven't seen South Asian head of state meeting for almost last 4 years. And there has been some countries, due to Uri incident, there has been cancellation of SAARC summit. That's quite unfortunate. Having that background in place, we have seen there has been a quid pro quo initiative. So the heads of the government inviting the emergency funds summit, and that has been participated with someone from Pakistan, and that follow-up meeting of the health ministry has been quid pro quo by Director General level officials of India, Bangladesh and Maldives, though it was called as a health ministers level meeting. So that speaks the kind of a political mindset that are prevailed in South Asian countries, where there has been a kind of internal externalization of the internal politics, which means that how do you address your domestic gallery and this is how you shape your politics. So that internal contradictions and compulsions led to South Asia having a least integrated region, and your diplomacy is completely bound by the fact that how do you address to that gallery. So that's quite unfortunate, but that's how it is. And if we are looking at different regions across the world, South Asia has been a least integrated region. And that too, and also there are other indications. South Asia has also been mired with certain kind of populism. South Asia is also mired with divisiveness. South Asia is also mired with authoritarian tendencies. So what it means that South Asia at the external level has a alienation with the people at the border level. Also within the border there is a alienation between the ruler and the ruled. So that created a scenario where there are disconnects, and that has been exposed by COVID. Because look at the public goods distribution system across South Asia. Look at the budgetary allocation in terms of health, because the politicians are totally alienated with the citizen, and that has created a state mechanism which doesn't allow its citizen to hold the government of the day to account, and which has not only, and then the COVID has really exposed, if you really look at the scenarios of day wages, it has not moved towards, as you rightly mentioned, that it has not moved to any kind of universal basic income. And that has been well captured by UN SCAP report. So, and if you look at this, South Asia has been faring in very low, because the disconnected between the ruler and the ruled. And we have not seen any indication of also, though the COVID has exposed the state of our health, state of our education, state of our social security system, but we have not moved from universal basic income to provide universal basic need, because it is the cry of the hour to move, not only to provide universal basic income in this emergency, but what is more important is to move towards universal basic need, because we do not know, and we have problems with our national statistics, be it India, be it Bangladesh, and I know for sure India has not released its labor force survey, which would provide, even pre-COVID scenario, the dismal functioning of the economy, especially particularly in terms of its employment. And recent research by Indian economists show that how the people at large has been in misery because of the unemployment scenario. So same applies with countries like Bangladesh. So what I am trying to argue is that the pre-COVID scenario was disastrous in particular countries. So what COVID-19 has done, it has aggravated the crisis. So meaning that in the West and others have been, an Indian policy elite has been in a scenario where they were saying, well, we are growing like anything, like Bangladesh, we are growing like anything. But that has been exposed. And its pre-COVID scenario, India was growing at a 5%. Now it would have a mass contraction. Simultaneously, that would happen in case of Bangladesh. So what it really amplifies is that the growth model itself was talking about is not the model that would cater to the people, which means that the growth model that the countries is, particularly its political leadership has taken credit, has not been in with people. So that has exposed the growth model itself. And the third issue that we need to talk about, as I said before, the issue of the universal basic need, because most of the people are day wagers, and 85% are either in informal sector or in unorganized sector, which means that they do not have adequate savings. And if there is an absence of the state in terms of providing basic need, then what would happen? Now we see, though, a false dichotomy between life and livelihood. Why should we be talking about life and livelihood? Because most of our social safety net programs are inadequate, or they are not covered, and they are also prone to corruption and leakages. So this exposes us to move towards a social security framework which is life cycle based, and which provides at least 7 kind of benefits for youth, for child, for mother, for the pension, for the aged. So that's the third pillar. Fourth pillar is, as you rightly mentioned, we need to talk about, and the COVID has exposed the over dependence on supply chain, which has been an import oriented. Look at the case with respect to Bangladesh and India, the growing deficit in terms of import. Same is with the China. So what we see is that the South Asian have never really tried to have a production network. Rather, the whole diplomacy has been tied in terms of making the country dependent on someone's import, rather really creating a scenario where everyone is part of the production network. And Now we see that there has been Indian High Commission in Bangladesh has been talking with the Bangladeshi officials with respect to having a supply chain restored through rail networks. But what is important is we would have really loved and welcomed it had the Indian side come up with the idea that we would like to also allow you to have a process where Nepal and Bhutan and others are being benefited. So that would have really given a kind of, then we have seen we have seen the Indian side coming up with the idea of having armed forces support in terms of COVID-19, which is ludicrous. Simply it speaks how South Asia, how its South Bloc is naive, and that has been quite adequately responded by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So how naive the Indian policy circle is, that while Bangladesh has been acclaimed in terms of its presence in UN services, not only that, in case of Liberia and Sierra Leone, Bangladeshi army doctors have gained huge acclaim for their service. So look at the way they perceive, because if there is an alienation between the people and the government, then bureaucracy also gets alienated, and they come up with bizarre kind of suggestions, which not only which received a different kind of a dimension. So what I'm trying to suggest is that let's pause for a while and think, where are we going to be after post COVID world? Do we want to see a sense of equality, of relationship, a sense of sisterhood and brotherhood, or do we want to be embroiled in our history of the past, where we are hostess to our certain issues, and particularly there are problems with Indo-Pakistan, and simultaneously there are problems with Indo-Bangladesh, and these are well known. I don't want to repeat it. And how do we really move forward from this mindset, which is presumably understood by the people, a friendship of not equal, a friendship of dominance? So that's an issue that India has to understand, not other countries. And the problem entirely lies with India. I am very frank. Simultaneously, how do we want to see this South Asian relationship being shaped by China and America? Because America has its Indo-Pacific strategy, and how they want to shape it, whether they want to have a global leadership, and would they be able to maintain that, how India and USA are coming up, because there are many issues that involve in that relationship, and simultaneously how American leadership wants to remain as a leader in multilateral processes. Because with this WHO episodes and other episodes, and also their president being not really being, because of the divisiveness, one media says that he is a liar, the other media says he is a saint. So they have to sort their home. Like India, they have to sort everything in their home front. Simultaneously, the way China is coming, and the narrative China is presenting with respect to Belt and Road Initiative, where India has initially objected its because of its sovereignty. So how do we really? But India is also, with respect to AIB and BRICS Bank, they are part of it. So how India and China would be really looking at, that's quite an important issue in shaping, and whether China would be given an observer status in South Asia, that's too easy. So what I am trying to suggest is that we have to pause, we have to think, and we have to really ask ourselves, should we want to move forward, or should we limit ourselves in the rhetoric? Thank you for listening to me. Sorry I wouldn't be able to be here with you and listen to your words of wisdom. I'm really sorry, I would be missing a lot. Thank you.
I'll request Dr. Shaheen Akhtar. Head of the Department of International Relations at National Defense University, Pakistan. Dr. Shaheen Akhtar will brief us about Pakistan's response to COVID-19 and its role in SAARC. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me opportunity to share my views, my perspective on this COVID cooperation. I've heard the Professor Sere, and I think towards the end of his conversation, he actually pointed at very important aspect. That is how we actually approach the SAARC or the cooperation within SAARC, the question of mindset and the question of actually India-Pakistan relations, which have been, because they are key player in the SAARC, in this organization. So if their relations are actually shaped by so many other issues which they have been somehow unable to overcome, they are reflected in the possibility of a cooperation within the SAARC. And also what we see is increasingly over a period, the region is actually becoming more, say, moving away from collaboration, more disintegrated in terms of connectivity, while the world is actually moving towards more connectivity, more collaboration, more trade relationship. Here we see is that we are, raising the barriers. We are actually having all kind of border problems, issues. I'm talking about entire region as well as more so when it comes to India, Pakistan. So within this atmosphere, as being also pointed out, since 2016, we are not having a SAARC summit. So in our organization, where for years you don't have a head of state meeting each other at the highest political level, you can see what would be the possibility of getting over the issues that we have amongst ourselves, or promoting collaboration. So to me, it is like COVID has thrown a big opportunity, a big challenge as well to the South Asian leadership, political leadership, especially India, Pakistan, whether they show their political, will and statesmanship to seize this opportunity and restart their dialogue process. So there is a I would say there's a lot of literature around us now which says that pandemics bring peace. There's a potential of pandemics pushing countries, community to build peace. But there is also caveats that in under what condition, what circumstances they will be actually moving towards peace or ending hostility. So it is like if the disaster is massive, if the casualties are massive, if the a lot of stress on their resources only, then they will be. But I would say here we are in this region, these two countries having very large population, and we are yet to really see the actual impact of the COVID-19 on our supply chain that have been also talked about, on our food production, on our livelihood. A lot of people actually, especially the marginalized community, have been further marginalized. So, and it is here to stay for a while. It's not really going away. So we are faced with a big challenge, which is actually hurting our society across the region. And like climate change, which is very much to me linked with this phenomena. So it is like it's not just one pandemic that we are facing. We are likely to really have a repeat of it, such calamities in future as well. So one aspect is that it opens up collaboration amongst the health sector of all these country, the improving and learning from each other in terms of responding to the such disasters, sharing their best practices. So there's a lot of scope in that way. And the other aspect is which I actually started with is more political. Uh, in the conflict zone, especially when it comes to India, Pakistan, and the hostility on the line of control, there was a global call of immediate ceasefire by UN Secretary General. So it was a great opportunity, and there was a lot of support coming to that. And what we see here is almost opposite. So can we imagine to start with the leadership from the two sides sees this opportunity and go for ending this tension and restoring a ceasefire on the line of control, and especially the region of the divided region of Kashmir. What you see, people are actually facing the COVID intensity in the same manner. The healthcare system is very, very fragile, and there is a lot of human resource limitation. So, in fact, there's a lot of problem of access to those community, and on top of it, what we see is in the month of March and April there have been more tension on the line of control. And so it will be like, will the leadership uh, will allow those people actually to have opportunity to at least approach and access the medical facilities, uh, and also the um, access to internet and all that, because the doctors there have been facing that. So what you see is in the first meeting, Pakistani side did flag that. So it is like the political issues between India and Pakistan are actually creating a lot of hurdles. And since they are two big countries, if they don't really manage their affairs or use this as an opportunity, it will be very difficult that this cooperation, this opening, we had earlier an opening when there was opening of this Kartarpur corridor, and the leadership of the Pakistani side actually gave this was very uh, forthcoming to really take it forward, but somehow that hasn't worked. So if this opportunity also fizzles out, and it the way it has also started is like very cautious approach, meetings are really good, and they have really triggered a lot of positivity in the region, the smaller country, even in Pakistan. So there's a lot of positivity around, but how one can really build on that, and also how one can build the this collaboration through the SAARC's organizational institutions, because the structures, if the structures of SAARC or this the institution, the existing mechanism are not really empowered, they are not really given that kind of role, then I'm afraid that it will be left to individual act, or individual initiative, not really moving very far. So that has been actually the problem with SAARC, and especially the smaller countries have been also trying to really say focus on strengthening what I mean is the secretariat. So that's why what you see is in the beginning, Pakistan was insisting on that this fund should be placed under the SAARC secretariat, and modalities of its use should be settled. But despite that, Pakistan has announced its contribution that shows that Pakistan is ready to seize the opportunity, and but it would like that such structures within the SAARC or the mechanism should be strengthened. Pakistan also hosted the SAARC Health Ministers video conference, and urged on the revival of the technical committee of the health in the SAARC platform. So it is like if the structures of the SAARC existing structures and their mechanism, if they are utilized, it will be actually the, strengthen the mechanism further, and give the opportunity to the say all sides, actually all countries, to really build on that. So it will be like to me, it is a great opportunity, and especially assessing the long-term impact of the COVID-19 on the social sector, on the our economic sector. But at the same time, if the political issues or questions are not addressed, it will be very difficult. In that, I would say that there is an opportunity if we can have virtual meetings, related to COVID cooperation. Can we have a virtual SAARC summit as well to kickstart the process of interaction at the highest political level? So political will is very important. The vision of the leadership so to take this region forward is very important. The emphasis on the regional connectivity is very important, and there and the last, in fact, coming back to the line of control, what you see, there were small CBMs like cross-LOC trade, which actually has been suspended. If it is revived, and the reason being, what we hear is that the people living along this very marginalized area have no other alternate sources for their supplies, essential supplies, or if it is like or their livelihood. So if it is revived, because what we see is that in post-COVID world, there will be more focus on the regionalization of the economies, localization of the economies, and the regions have more opportunity actually to promote further integration or connectivity. BRI is an opportunity, and I don't want to get into that. There's a lot of blame game going on in our part of the world, and there is a certain situation which has really raised the temperature, between the two sides. So all that actually need to be addressed at the highest political level. Maybe back channel can be revived, because what you see is the in the media and by many leading experts, there's a lot of desire for peace and resumption of dialogue between the two countries. If it doesn't happen, any initiative regarding the covert, say, collaboration may not really go very far, because we are living in a world which is very much political. And what we have seen in the last 10 to 15 years of the peace process in this part of the world, it was like it moved only when there was a larger, say, political will and say trust building at the highest level. So I think sub-regionalism should not probably be, say, substitute the SAARC, compromise SAARC as such. I stop here, and if there is any question, I'm there.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. As we know, the challenge of COVID-19, it has there are multiple factors at play, but the key challenge is to the health system. And Dr. Anton here is giving us a presentation on healthcare in South Asia and regional cooperation. Dr. Anton is a professor at Department of Social Studies, the Open University of Sri Lanka. Before I hand over the forum to Dr. Anton, may I please request our speaker to stick to 5 minutes, because we have to accommodate questions as well at the end, and we have a number of speakers on pending as well. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. When we talk about the South Asia, and the cooperation is always officially stressed but practically ignored or taken for granted situation. The colonization of the region ended with the seeds of enmity or hatred or division well planted. This sets the background for today's discussion. And I'm also very much thankful for Dr. Said Ahmed and also Sustainable Development Policy Institute for inviting me to take part in this webinar. I'm sure that you all can see my slides now. This is how I structure my presentation. Yeah, so you can see it. And South Asia. What is South Asia? It's a we have a lot of commonalities. People live in this part of the world has a lot of unique aspects which compose our unique identity. We have common inheritance, family, marriage, kinship, cultural patterns, taste, food, dishes, emotions, etc. And recently we also we are also united through cricket. So it is a region with a lot of similarities within diversities. We have a lot of similarities within diversities. So in this context, we are talking about healthcare. Healthcare is very much important in our discussion. It is the way how the how organized way of provision of medical care to individuals or a community in any given society. In South Asia, we have a lot of difficulties, but with all the difficulties we have, we are working very hard to make sure primary healthcare facility provision of primary healthcare facility for the people, but still we have to work very hard. Basically, healthcare provision is provided, divided into three: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary is very much important at this moment because we are quarantined, we are lockdown situation. We are instructed to follow a lot of hygienic measures at home, and in a way, family has become mini clinic. So community level healthcare is very much important, and across the South Asian countries, there's huge need for improvement of the primary healthcare facility. So in this sense, I also like to. I was going through the South Asian countries, except Bhutan. All the other countries have private and public healthcare facility. So what have we done so far is very much important with regard to regional collaboration. So we have established, as many presenters earlier explained about South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. But as professor from Bangladesh explained, it was not that much function for last 4 years. Anyway, they also had video conference on March 15. That is really a very important discussion they had, and I really appreciate that initiation. So they basically agreed to have emergency fund, COVID-19 emergency fund. This is really useful for assuring healthcare facility for these communities. and India also said that they are ready to provide doctors with equipment and testing kits, etc. So that is in a way that is really a good initiation. And they also propose to use existing SAARC disaster management center to pull best practices operating among the member states. So that is one of the areas which can be strengthened further in the future, and also suggested to create a common research platform to share new research findings connected to this in South Asian members. So my next attention is, what can we do more in order to strengthen, in order to make sure well-being and welfare of the South Asian communities. And then for sure, this is not the first and the last disaster that we face or health crisis that we face. What I'm proposing is we can create mechanism consisting of high-powered people to face and prepare this kind of unexpected challenges. And also SAARC can be strengthened as previous presenters highlighted. Our discussion should be linked to practical programs. Activate SAARC Health Ministers Forum and Joint Initiative is also one of the other proposal I have. With regard to primary healthcare facilities, address the income loss issue. Nowadays people we have been for about 2 months lockdown situation, health income issues of the families, income issues of the countries, that will be really helpful for them to provide adequate healthcare facilities. There may be financial shortage in providing healthcare facilities continuously. Sharing medical staff, sharing medical equipment is very much important in this context. And also there is a need for grasping socio-cultural traditions in addressing these new health crisis situations. Especially in South Asian context, we are family-based people and we are community-based people also. So we are, in this context now we are trying to physically distance while keeping socially connected. Somehow or other they have introduced this term social distancing, which is not practical for South Asian situation. Therefore South Asian region should come up with mechanisms to address or else educate people in a more appropriate manner. And the regional body should be established strong links with global institutions, like regional bodies should be having strong link with WHO, World Bank, to get necessary funds and infrastructure. The other aspects that we can be considered is supporting sharing facilities people. For an example, South Asian people at the moment, a lot of Indians are in Sri Lanka, Pakistanis are in Sri Lanka, in the same way Sri Lankans are in Nepal, etc. In a crisis situation, we should be facilitating them, giving them enough support to make sure their well-being and welfare. And also it is our primary responsibility to control the borders. We should be making sure diseases, viruses are not spread to other countries or else other regions in the country. That is also one of the important dimensions when we consider primary healthcare facility. The other dimension I would like to highlight here is that so need to pay serious attention on investment in community-based health services and capacity, specialty training. We have to pay more attention on community-based health service provision and specialty training. Especially in I have been to Nepal, and in hill regions there's real need for such facilities. Another proposal I have is forming a center to fight any alien viruses, threats in the future. So that will be really helpful for protecting South Asian region. And we also, surely we all know that, and we also will be benefited a lot if we are collaborated. And already we are collaborating whenever there are internal or external laws. Pakistan supports Sri Lanka, India supports Sri Lanka, and there are such kind of supports when it comes to wars and internal conflicts. In the same way, we can support each other for health crisis and also to improve health conditions of our countries. For an example, Sri Lanka got ambulance services and also a lot of facilities developed, hospitals in the plantation sector by Indian government. That is really helpful at this moment of crisis. I heard while I was listening to this discussion, high-level discussion, India brought down 23 Bangladeshi students and 9 Maldives students along with their students from Wuhan. So that is a symbolic explanation of symbolic expression of cooperation. So this kind of short-term collaboration to fight this pandemic, COVID-19 issue will be really helpful in order to build long-term collaborations to improve healthcare facilities in the region. And finally, I would like to, before I end the presentation, I would like to say it is only through the collaboration we can make sure the development and international level healthcare standard maintains in the region, which assures the sustainability of well-being and welfare of the people live in South Asia. Especially in this context, we have to pay more attention on primary healthcare facility other than the secondary and tertiary healthcare facilities. I'm not stressing they are not important. They are important, but we have to make sure in international standard facilities par with international standards are provided for our people in the country. Thank you very much, and I'll be here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anton. That was very elaborate. As developing countries, the vulnerability level for the entire region is very high. But for Afghanistan, particularly, both for a war-torn country and being neighbors with Iran and Pakistan, two strongly affected countries that it is dependent upon widely for its import, the challenge for Afghanistan is even bigger. So I'd request Saifullah Tai, who is a PhD candidate at Deakin University, Australia, to brief us on the situation in Afghanistan and its response to COVID-19 and its role in SAARC. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Aisha, and everybody else for inviting me here. So I think the question is rightly looking at the, first of all, what's going on inside Afghanistan, and then how can we see Afghanistan as an element as part of the SAARC region. So I think looking at Afghanistan, it's really important to look at Afghanistan is dealing with several issues, right? So first and foremost is the political tensions in Afghanistan, and that kind of came at a very, more or less, COVID came at a very, very difficult time for Afghanistan, because there has been a protracted political conflict happening in Afghanistan between the two rivals, and even the inswearing of two different presidents that we had happened just a week before the country going on stage 1 lockdown. So, and since then, Afghanistan has been facing this issue itself because what we had, which is very ironic, because what we are talking about, saving lives and livelihood, we have a Minister of Public Health, which was part of the Dr. Abdullah's team, who was the former chief executive in Afghanistan. And then you have Ashraf Ghani on the other side. So the president and the minister, they are from two different political philosophies. So there was already tensions and even uncertainty on how are we going to have a national plan dealing with the COVID issue. So what happened that even President Ghani, he established his own team, a task force to deal with the COVID-19 and what was going to be perceived to be a major challenge in Afghanistan. So that was already setting the stone on what is going to be the institutional issues in Afghanistan. And of course, I don't want to go into the details of what Afghanistan goes through. Its dependency on foreign aid, which is almost 65%. Despite some improvements on the healthcare sector, still there are numerous challenges in the country. And of course, that what you also elaborated into Afghanistan being sandwiched kind of between Pakistan and India. And right away, thousands and thousands of people from Iran were crossing border to Afghanistan, which that was very, very alarming. So if you want to look at the situation in Afghanistan, one could optimistically look at, well, Afghanistan is not that bad thing, because you had so many cases, perhaps potential cases, coming from Iran to Afghanistan. It was expected that the entire healthcare system will collapse in just a week or two. But we still see a bit of silver lining there. The number of cases in Afghanistan is not that bad, although this just could be only a very, very premature conclusion to say that maybe we are not going to see a very, very big disastrous situation in Afghanistan. Nonetheless, if and I think that that goes across the region, because there isn't really a very strong testing regime, and because there's of course the question of lack of data and information and accessibility, and of course there's a lot of rumors happening. And I think in our region, when we talk about similarities within our differences, we all have this issue as well on what is going to happen. I heard, and it's basically in Afghanistan, that people were afraid of even going to the hospitals for basic tests, because the rumors were that if somebody dies because of COVID-19, they're going to burn their bodies and they're not going to have a proper funeral. And of course, according to the Islamic tradition, that was like a big, big taboo. So people were actually treating even to going to the doctors for basic medical tests. So that puts Afghanistan in a very peculiar position, because it's dealing with its domestic issues, and of course there's a lack of institutions, and then it's dealing with the with this kind of dilemma on what to do with Iran and Pakistan, because closing borders is not going to be an issue, because Afghanistan is heavily dependent on import of goods and most of the services coming from these two countries. And at the same time, what to do if not go on a country lockdown. But again, comes back to all this whole informal economies that we have in Afghanistan. So the government has been very, very, very crippled, and I would say even hit harder than it was already by the COVID-19. So what it does, of course, as usual, Afghanistan, because of lack of domestic resources, reaches to neighboring countries and to the wider international community for support. SAARC definitely, as an institution, offered some services. I was talking to somebody at the Afghan Minister of Finance yesterday, claiming that Afghanistan has just put an application for $1.5 million as part of the fund. But again, I think despite all of support that can come from the region, Afghanistan's issues will be way and by far bigger than expecting a small, more or less, handouts coming from SAARC. Afghanistan's issues, because of the severity of issues and because of the magnitude of the problems, if they actually escalate, would be far greater than just a few millions of dollars. But I think if we're going to talk about SAARC itself and Afghanistan being a member of it, we talk about regional cooperations. But I think some of you might agree with this one, that I think what COVID-19 perhaps did is strengthen actually the concept of the realist perspectives on the state and sovereignty and dealing with their own issues. That a state comes first, that people within the states come before anybody else. And I think that has been very much projected in many countries, in many regions, including the most perhaps integrated regional cooperation, which is the European Union. The governments and the states, they decided to go on lockdown. They went on very strict shutdown of their borders, and there it didn't matter how deep those relations were between the countries. So they decided that the best thing for their people and for the state would be to going on a lockdown. What I think would be perhaps more helpful to look at in the future, and we all know the regional rivalries, what's going on between Pakistan and India. That would be, in a sense, affecting on Afghanistan's relations with its neighbor, Pakistan, and of course the impact of China's impact on the region. It would definitely perhaps would be a good strategy to invest on human security, and I think that goes beyond domestic needs. We know that there are going to be always spillovers of these, whether it's conflict or it's a pandemic. We are going to have issues, and they're going to be spillovers to our own countries. So strengthening the human capacity especially in more needy states such as Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, perhaps in Bangladesh, would be an ideal first step for really genuine regional cooperation. Otherwise, if we just rely on, I love the example of pulling out few students from Wuhan, but if we're going to rely on that, we really can't see that to be a region to really flourish and really help both in lives and livelihood of the people. We really need to see what are the larger and larger concessions that the states need to make starts with building trust between each other, and then actually genuinely supporting human security, because that would be the only way that if we are going to face another challenge like this, the region would be at least ready for protecting its own people, if not the region itself. And I'm going to just conclude that. I think my 5 minutes is just up, and I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Saifullah. I'd now request Dr. Niranjan Sahu. He is a Senior Research Fellow at Observer Research Foundation, India, and he will brief us on India's responses to COVID-19 and its role in SAARC.
Okay. A very good afternoon, and thanks, Jahid bhai, for getting me to this forum, and it's quite. So far, I've been hearing very exciting conversations, and I'm also grateful to Sustainable Development Institute for initiating this. This is very critical, especially at the civil society academic level. We need to really debate how this entire pandemic is evolving and panning out, because this is one pandemic which is so unique in a sense that it doesn't respect borders, and South Asia being one of the poorest and one of the population wise largest sort of sub-region in the world, probably this hits South Asia very hard than many other regions. But surprisingly, I mean, we probably have to really, I mean, what epidemiologists have been saying, that probably because of our young demographic and then our history of exposure to virus and bacteria, the disease history is able to sustain us. And if you look at 20% of population we have in the world, and we have less than 2% of infection. That itself tells the story. I mean, how South Asia has able to sustain. Otherwise, with our kind of healthcare system, what previous speakers said from Sri Lanka, we would have been, in a very, very dire situation. So far we are going very well. I think each country with all its difficulties, whether it's India or Pakistan or even Bangladesh, I think all of us are handling this pandemic. I would say very well compared to many other countries which are resource rich, medical, they have advanced system, everything. Having said this, I would say this SAARC initiative, which is in fact, I and Jahid, we have been in fact converging on this for quite some times, and he wrote a lovely piece on this, especially about this SAARC initiative about healthcare and health emergency funds, which Mr. Modi initiated, and then it got a response, a very good response from all the countries, irrespective of whatever differences, internal differences will be always there. But so far, if you see the kind of a movement we have seen in the last 1.5 months, I think it gives a lot of hope that everything is not lost in the entire geopolitics and in internal battle, whether it's Indo-Pak battle or other rivalries or domestic politics, which in many times actually affects the integration. But I'm quite hopeful that probably this should create an opening, because if we actually kind of a history that we have in especially in the SAARC, such a kind of a tumultuous history, where we haven't actually really made any kind of tangible kind of gains, except for some a few setting a few institutions here and there, and some smaller initiatives. I think if you compare with our peers like the ASEAN and many other forums, I think blocks, we are nowhere. And that obviously has to do with the unique kind of history of these regions. One that what my Bangladesh colleague said about India, blaming a lot of things about India, I would definitely agree. I mean, there are a lot of things that India has to take, but then geography is something also you can't actually take that out, because by whatever you say, there will be always India is overbearing in this region, because being the largest country in terms of geography and power system. and that overbearing will always remain. But then a lot of other forums with even such peculiarities have able to continue and do produce good work. For instance, if you look at the organization of American associations, US is the biggest and the superpower. It has a massive overbearing on all other countries, but even then that forum is not really cut up so badly the way SAARC has been. And I think, of course, the primary reason, of course, is Indo-Pak rivalry, which has strangulated it. And for I think for probably I'm actually not even hopeful in our own lifetime we will see any kind of positive result happening, unless something suddenly some probably miracle happens. So that's the reality, and with that I think we have to invest and be creative in which way we can actually take this forum forward and nurture kind of relationship among different countries. I think especially this pandemic provides a lot of opening in terms of what the Sri Lankan speakers said about the collaboration among different institutions, whether it's on healthcare issues, healthcare systems. We have a lot of pharma companies in all these countries actually, which are actually very good at producing generic drugs and providing at the very cheapest level. India is, of course, a world leader on that. So that's something to capitalize. And second thing, I think building institutions. I think what previous speaker also said about that we have a lot of forums available within SAARC. Like we have already a disaster management forum. Whether that can be revamped, and because in future this pandemics and this kind of situation, whether it's natural disaster or pandemics like COVID, is going to happen in future, and we need to create institutional architecture that can really respond quickly and support countries which simply cannot have the wherewithal to cope up the challenge of this kind. So I think this is also one way of investing that. And then the third thing, I think, where I think we can actually, as academic, as think tanks, as people from civil society can do, is that I think we should initiate this sort of a more often, write and highlight some of these issues, have as many as virtual kind of meeting, because see this COVID also provides us a kind of opportunity. See, we could actually converse through using this virtual mode, and people from as somebody said, from Pacific, from all part of it, from Australia, from Afghanistan, from Sri Lanka, India, we could actually have kind of conversations. I think this is where actually we can make contribution, because there is no point in breaking our head about political leadership and internal politics. That's going to continue whichever way you say. The populism, nationalism, sub-nationalism, and internal vote bank compulsion, because now this entire region is region is a democratic full house. You don't have a military regime, or you don't have an autocratic regime in this. Yeah, there could be authoritarian tendency and other thing. That's a different issue. But I think this is one region which is now a democratic full house. So that gives us ample opportunity in terms of providing what you call some kind of movement in freedom in movement, freedom to do collaborate and write a lot of things. We can be also very objective in criticism of our own country's leadership, what they are doing, and highlight and also create a hope which way we can actually build this sort of institutions, whatever way we have wasted in all these decades. I think no point in bickering and no point in breaking head that we couldn't do. I think we should look forward and take this pandemic as an opportunity. As Pakistani speaker also said, she rightly said that this provides a huge opportunity. I think this is where we should capitalize and probably get the focus back, because India-Pakistan relationship, I am not I'm all the time I want this relationship to change and become the way you have seen it happen in European Union. They fought hundreds of wars, and this entire continent was in bloodshed for how many centuries, but they could economically integrate and made a kind of outlier. So it can happen at some point probably, but I'm not sure whether in our lifetime. But I think whatever we can do at our level to build peace, to connect these dots and provide a better image of South Asia, I think we should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Niranjan. Our next speaker is Dr. Prakash Bhattari. He is President of Center for Social Change, Nepal, and he'll brief us about Nepal's COVID-19 responses and its role in SAARC.
So thank you, Jahid and SPDI, for this opportunity to share some of my perspective on this important topic. And I think it's a quite good forum to exchange ideas and information what is happening across the region, and and it will definitely help us to build some sort of like policy or strategy, or give some sort of policy advice to the concerned authorities. Regarding Nepal, just a little bit of update. I think we have so far only 82 cases, and out of that, like 16 people have already been recovered. So in terms of the number, like we have less than less than 100, less than 100 infected people, and the government has adopted this lockdown, as an approach, to reduce the spread of virus. But lockdown has come out as a kind of blanket approach, without pre-planning, or pre-informing, or even like rightly informing, the people, like how they need to prepare themselves during the time of crisis, and what they should be doing. And the government is also kind of taking lead to provide relief packages to those who are unable to live their life during the time of lockdown. But like in terms of kind of broader thinking, I mean, how the country should go from here to the next level, like there's not much thinking happening at the government level, though there are some discourses has been started at the civil society level, or or among the intellectuals, that how we should be imagining our future. So that's a kind of a brief update what is happening in Nepal. In terms of the issues, I think like I'm focusing most of my research right now on the impact of COVID-19 on vulnerable groups. So, so my research, my thinking is more about, I think this pandemic.
Please, अपना mic बंद कर लें.
To think about like who are the most vulnerable group, and how this sort of crisis impacts them. So if we look at these vulnerable groups, the most impacted people are the foreign labor migrants, because Nepal is a very much like a remittance based economy, and 25% is GDP is relied on the remittance that sent by the migrant workers, and they are the one like mostly affected by this crisis. And also the internal migrants, I mean, there are a lot of people migrating from one province to another, one district to another, and they are also the most affected by this pandemic. And I can see like similar kind of experience in India, like so many internal, these domestic migrants are affected by this pandemic. And also the people working in informal sectors, and the daily wage workers are another affected group, and people living with disabilities. So I think this pandemic has really recalled us who are the most vulnerable group, and it has also kind of give us a kind of lesson that our policy making process is far beyond addressing the need of this vulnerable group. So I think one of the area of opportunity for the future is like how we address, how we come up with like this vulnerable group driven kind of socioeconomic policy, so that could address the need of these people. And the second area, though previous speakers have also talked a lot about this, improving these social development sectors, and restructuring them, and and kind of finding some of the common regional programs that could benefit to all the country in the region. But I think what we really need at the moment is some sort of like decentralized social development programs and practices. I think there are social development programs happening across the region, across the country, but the thing is it's not decentralized. So that means like people are migrating from the rural areas to the urban areas, and people migrating to other countries for a nominal salary. So I think it's really important to come up with some sort of decentralized social development programs and the policies. I think that could be another common areas where the SAARC countries can come and discuss on these matters. And I don't know about other countries, but in the case of Nepal, there is already, the government has already started lending money from the international financial institutions. So I think this pandemic will increase this money lending practices, and I know that like some of the South Asian countries are already in a huge debt trap or debt crisis, and I think this pandemic will further increase the lending, money lending practices. And I think it's really important, like we as a civil society organization, or even from the academia, I think it's really important to ensure that there will be an accountable and transparent kind of money lending practices that every SAARC country is adopting, so that we won't be in a huge trap with long-term implications. So I think this money lending kind of practices should be in our scrutiny in the future. And the fourth point that I want to point it out here is I think none of the speakers have talked so far about this the military expenditure, the security expenditure in South Asia. And I was just going through this SIPRI, this Swedish Institute report, and South Asia is spending like 88.1 billion spend like 88.1 billion US dollar in 2019, and of which like India has 71 billion expenditure, and Pakistan has 10.3 billion, and rest of the countries are spending the remaining amount. So I think we also need to raise some sort of issues from our level, like how this military expenditure can be reduced, or if there is a scope for like reducing the military expenditure, so that that money could be spent on other like social economic development initiatives which we are talking about. Because if we just keep on lending money from the international financial institutions, and but not paying attention to reduce our other expenditures like a military expenditure, or even public public sector expenditure, I think we will still be in a huge deficit. So I think those are the things we need to take into consideration. And my final point is, I think when it comes to the future of SAARC and what SAARC can do, I think the SAARC has been a kind of dead institutions in many sense. So it needs a real real effort to revive this institution and to make it functional. So if it is not possible, like in the next couple of years, then what we are going to do? I think what we need to focus on is I think we need to go with like a sectoral approach. Like if if we want to work on the health issues, then like why not these health institutions across the region can come together and learn from each other and exchange ideas, or or education, or other social safety net issues. So I think we need for the time being, we need to go with sectoral approach rather than the holistic approach. I think holistic approach will delay the process, and it will take a long time. So I think we need to go with, and also we require a people-to-people collaboration. I think I mean, we have some collaboration at the people level, but there is not much. So I think we also need to promote more people-to-people collaboration and keep these issues into the attention of the policymakers and politicians. Then we can imagine a new South Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prakash. I'd now request Professor Siri Hatige. He is from Colombo University, Sri Lanka. Sorry, sir, for making you wait so long. If you would please brief us on Sri Lanka's responses to COVID-19 and its role in SAARC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have had a very good round of presentations, and I can do probably less talking because of that. A lot of groundwork was laid. I want to start with a bit of an observation. I think we need to be realistic. I mean, we are all very anxious to get something really good going within the region by way of regional collaboration. There's no question about it. But we have to always be realistic, and we know the constraints that we have to really work in order to really achieve whatever we want to achieve. So of course we can have aspirational goals, but on the other hand, I think we really don't need aspirational goals, because we have been having aspirational goals for a long time. What we need is a more realistic set of goals that can be achieved and where we can build consensus around, so that we will probably get something tangible done in the region in the next weeks and months and maybe also years, because it's not going to disappear in the next 12 months, even maybe even into the 2021. So that's realism. So I mean, what are the constraints? I think some of the constraints were outlined, but I would emphasize one additional constraint, and that is the policy space that we have in each one of our countries. When I say policy space, the policy space where we can have an impact. When I say we are basically coming from academic institutions, research centers, and various other similar civil society level organizations, and therefore our capacity to influence public policy, even in a very serious situation like this, is very limited in our region. Of course, it varies from place to place, but certainly we have, huge range. In some countries, you have a lot more than in other countries, but of course, it varies over time. There are times when you have more policy space, and there are times when you don't have that kind of policy space. So the point is, if you really want to influence public policy at a country level, then we operate certainly at a country level as individual people. But on the other hand, here we are trying to articulate a program, if you like, course of action at a regional level, and therefore we should figure out how we could really operate at a regional level, at a SAARC level, and get something onto the table, so that they'll be considered and that they will be taken up at a country level, because it comes from a regional kind of a forum. Okay, those are some of the observations that I wanted to make. But on the other hand, we should certainly recognize the space that we have within the region. Certainly, SAARC has been not very active, but nevertheless has been operational within the region for a very long time. And there have been a lot of things happening by way of people coming together, exchanges, and so on and so forth. Some are bilateral, some are multilateral, and so on and so forth. And the most recent one, this fund that someone was mentioned, is one of those. Now, also we have a constraint today, because we cannot run around as we did before. We can't just get into a plane and travel to Bangladesh or to Pakistan or whatever as we did before. So we'll have to always think in terms of how we could promote exchanges, collaboration, and so on and so forth in a virtual world, as much as we could. So like what we are doing now. So So the point is that the possibility of really working together has not diminished because we cannot really move around. So I think therefore we have on the one hand an opportunity because we have been working here as a regional grouping for a long time, and there has been quite a bit of things happening, and that is a positive one. And then also the possibility of working together in a virtual environment. I think those two. Now, going back to what we can do and what is the framework within which we could do. Certainly, at a let's say symbolic level, a lot is possible. For instance, you can have gestures on the part of the leaders, like agreeing to agreeing to cooperate, but not necessarily resulting in any kind of tangible outcomes. And then also you can have a declaration, and you can also have something like a fund that to which people can contribute and so on. And of course, all these things have happened. But the point is that here we are talking about something more concrete. We need to have a program that will touch the ground, because it is really the vast majority of the people in the region who are really in need of some kind of intervention to change the circumstances under which they live, and in some situations, of course, die. So, so how can we really operate within these constraints and use these opportunities to have some impact on each one of these countries through initiatives of the regional grouping? And I would say that we might have to think in terms of institutions. Certainly, at a country level, I would say when you go down from the leadership level, let's say the head of state level, you always have the foreign ministries basically sort of functioning as the kind of link to regional and other institutions. Therefore, we should certainly concentrate at the highest level, not so much at the level of the head of state, but certainly at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where you have quite a bit of things institutionalized already. For instance, the SAARC Secretariat is very much connected to that, and SAARC Secretariat is a very useful instrument, particularly in a situation like this. I remember having participated in some of the discussions where we talked about concentrating on social policy, and some of the speakers touched on the importance of social policy, where we have lagged far behind, partly due to poverty in the region, but partly due to lack of political will, and partly due to our wrong priorities, like putting more and more money into defense, for instance. I think it's true in many countries. Certainly in the case of Sri Lanka, that's a major issue, and I think that is really out of the question. We can't discuss that in Sri Lanka. So it is really the elephant in the room, but you can't sometimes talk about the elephant in the room. Anyway, so talking about the institutional mapping, I think it's important to start at the apex, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think it's possible to really reactivate some of those desks and officers and units and whatever you want to identify as focal points for us to get something taken up. And then, of course, you have sectoral level ministries, health. You have other ministries like economic planning, social services, and so on and so forth. So thirdly, agriculture, and so on and so forth, science and technology. So you see, sectoral level ministries and institutions are very, very important. And I think those institutions can be actually brought together into a kind of a network, maybe because it's an emergency situation, that there is something that has to be done. I think it's happening in Sri Lanka at the moment. Like all the institutions are asking the question, what can we do? And I think that is really an opportunity. For instance, I'm connected to the Ministry of Science and Technology also, and I think they are discussing how some of these things can be done. And then, of course, the public administration. I think there is quite a lot, that we have very strong public administration systems in this part of the region, For instance, so I know in India, and then there are many possibilities to actually use those things. So the point that I'm trying to make is, as I already mentioned, there is a bit of a thunderstorm. So I hope I hope it will not break my connection. If it breaks my connection, then just forget about it. But otherwise, I'll just continue as long as I can. Okay, so the ministerial level, sectoral ministries, I think that's one opportunity where you can have linkages between, let's say, agriculture ministry in Colombo and ministries of agriculture in South Asia, so that we can figure out how we could and so on. And then the poverty alleviation kind of ministries, social security kind of ministries, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, research institutions, both at a national level as well as at other levels. Like, for instance, in each one of our countries, we have both, state level and also civil society level research organizations. So maybe at these are arrangements that we can do. So what I'm getting at is that this institutional mapping, I think, is very critical. In each one of our countries, and see how we could really bring these networks, across countries, so that they'll be working together with a focus on addressing the issues connected with COVID. Now, what do we do? I think there is a lot that can be done in terms of exchange of knowledge. Already there is accumulated knowledge, and as you know, we didn't have too much time to learn about COVID. And actually, people have learned a lot over the last 3 to 4 months across the world. And that knowledge, I think is very critical. And that knowledge, can be shared across these countries. And then, of course, ideas. Certainly, there are good ideas, and people generate a lot of good ideas. And I think those ideas have to be also saved. And then best practices, in relation to various aspects of the management of the pandemic. Best practices. I mean, those are things that can be easily documented. In a single one single page can document a best practice in a certain area, and so on and so forth. So I think exchange of knowledge, ideas, and practices can be, and then of course exchange of resources, not only financial resources but also other resources. Can be shared. And I think one person mentioned. The last person from Nepal, I think that's a very good idea. People to people exchanges. I think we have a fund already established for the region official, but we can also have a people's fund established, and the people's fund can be contributed to by anyone within each one of the countries, so that we'll build up maybe, I don't know, I'm just thinking aloud, maybe a people's fund can be established so the people can contribute. And then, of course, you can have a management group to decide on what basis we are going to allocate these things, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, and then finally, I think I will just make one particular comment from my side. Actually, I launched an initiative called a Consortium for Social Solidarity. What is lacking in our part of the world is institutionalized social solidarity. I mean, if you go to a social democratic country like Germany or Scandinavia or Canada or whatever, you have institutionalized social solidarity. What you have to do is to prop up. What you have to do is to basically build on existing, systems of social solidarity, state-led social. But whereas here we don't have such things, and therefore we have to really also initiate something from below social. You promote social solidarity. What is social solidarity? It is cutting across, social divisions, class divisions and other divisions, so that you build social solidarity to protect the people, to support the people, and so on and so forth. I think if you bring all these things together, I think we might be able to come up with a framework, come up with a lot of areas where we could promote regional cooperation, and then we can probably implement such a program through the institutional network that we identify. So with that, I
Sorry
stop
to
here.
interrupt, sir. We are running short of time. I would
Yeah.
want you to conclude,
Yeah.
please. Thank you.
Sorry
Thank you.
about that.
No problem. Thank you, sir. So our last speaker for the day is Dr. Zahid Shahab Ahmed, and he is a research fellow at Deakin University, Australia. And Dr. Zahid is basically the person who has brought this wonderful panel together. Thank you for that, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you to the SDPI and all the speakers. I'll be quick because my job is to just focus on SAARC as an institution and something that I've been studying for a very long time. When I picked up this topic for my PhD, many people were surprised that why would someone like to study SAARC, which was labeled as Akash said as a dead institution or ineffective institution and all that. But interestingly, when I started my PhD, that was a high time for SAARC. A lot of initiatives were being set up. For example, SAARC Development Fund, South Asian University came afterwards. Initiatives like SAARC Energy Center in Pakistan and so on. So when I was at the SAARC Secretariat in Kathmandu, it almost appeared as if SAARC was in some kind of a race with other regional institutions. That was that time. And now is the time when if you do research on SAARC, there is no journal that will publish it if you focus on SAARC alone. But SAARC, I think for us, it's important to be realistic to see why SAARC was established. It was established to use the functionalist approach for collaboration, to avoid the political disputes and or differences. But as the organization avoids those political disputes, it's interesting that the member states actually don't let the institution avoid those issues. Politics naturally come in its way. Then I think another reality is that SAARC regional cooperation is just one component of the foreign policy of all the member states. It's not a priority. Regional cooperation in South Asia has not been a priority for most of the SAARC's member states. This could be because most of the states, they do more trade with the outside world than within the region. So naturally, the intra-regional trade is still around 5%, and I think these crises are further going to affect the situation. So naturally, when they are competing for the markets outside the region, there is this competition. The competition in terms of geoeconomics and geopolitics as well. When I think of the problems for the SAARC as an institution, I think in all that race that I witnessed during my PhD at the SAARC Secretariat or at the institutional level, they have stretched so thin from issues like human development to health issues and energy sector, anything under the sun. I think they're focusing on that. All the issues, they stretched so thin, and that led to a lot of issues in terms of the commitment, for example. So there are then ineffective institutions like these terrorism related or drug offenses related desks. They are called desks in Colombo, and we can understand what they do. So they're basically they have been ineffective. So I think it decided to model itself on ASEAN, started to move towards cooperation in security sector, and along the way forgot about its key mission, which was to focus on human development and human security. And the problem with actually stretching too thin is that all member states have to commit funding for any initiative that is set up at the SAARC level. And as Safiullah talked about, Afghanistan's most of its GDP is foreign funded. So Afghanistan, if there is another SAARC initiative, it has to financially commit to that. And it's actually not possible for many of the member states, interestingly. And when I was thinking of the solutions, India's initiative of the emergency fund, I think it was very timely and it's very much needed. And as Dr. Abid Salari also talked about livelihood and food and all of these crises, I was thinking, there was no need to have it set up on its own, SAARC emergency fund. because there is this SAARC Development Fund, and this emergency fund could just become one component of it. And looking ahead, I think, and that would have naturally resolved Pakistan's reservations that India is taking the lead or India is dominating and all of that. So, that could have been easily dealt with. And we could have still moved on with Pakistan's endorsement of the emergency fund, because Pakistan is already part of the SAARC Development Fund and provides funds there. I think moving ahead now, when everyone is individually dealing with their crisis, I think the SAARC has to think of what happens next, post COVID-19 crisis, how that they can be managed. And initiatives like SAARC Development Fund should exclusively focus on post COVID-19 South Asia, and how different initiatives for food, livelihood, even in terms of vaccination, issues of refugees and migrant workers, for example, a lot of these issues will come up and they could be dealt with. And I think as an institution, I feel that SAARC needs to review and prioritize, and sort of some kind of a process of consolidation. It has, again, I would say that it has stretched too thin, and for its revival, I think it has to focus on its key initiatives. And the coronavirus crisis, I think, provides with one such opportunities that can revive actually interest in the organization and regional cooperation in South Asia overall. And the idea of a virtual SAARC summit, I think, is a very good one, thanks to Professor Shaheen and others who have actually recommended this. And also when non-aligned movement and other organizations are also going, opting for these virtual summits, and I think SAARC can also do. But one thing is that Pakistan should still be should still be given the opportunity to host it, because the last summit was actually was to take place in Islamabad 4 years ago, and I think Pakistan's foreign ministry should take the lead and propose this virtual summit of SAARC to discuss not just the ongoing crisis but also the post-COVID-19 situation. I'll just end here, but I also wanted to say that I have a book on SAARC from my PhD, and I'll be very happy to send complimentary e-copies of that to anyone, so they can get in touch with SDPI, and I can send electronic copies of my book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zahid. The forum is now open for questions. You can turn on your mics if you want to ask a question, and I'll note down your names and get back to you on your number.
Thank you, Aisha, for giving me a chance, and thank you all the participants. I would like to start with famous, I think, maybe not very famous, but famous saying by Dr. Slattery. He once said, so we admit there are issues in SAARC. They are not cooperating. It's a problem. But the absence of SAARC would be a disaster. So we need to be very careful when saying the SAARC is dead, because SAARC at least provide us an opportunity sometime for handshake, which ultimately can lead towards some positive engagement. So we have to be very clear, SAARC need to be here. And then we talk about what should be done. I think when we are seeing about European Union model, we can get good things from there. We can also learn from bad thing there. For example, EU is a monetary union, which is creating problem for UE, and some countries have started to oppose it. And second thing, they are religion based. Look, they are all Christian countries. One is a Turkey, which wanted to be the member, being a Muslim country, they could not make it. If we want to replicate this model in SAARC, we have diversity in the religion. We will not be able to do it. So whenever talking about what to do, I think we need to be very clear. And then my question is to Zahid. He was talking about SAARC when he was doing PhD. He shared a very good narrative. And fortunately, I met him there on a road when we were roaming there. He was also roaming. So you are saying we have to bring back the focus. So what is focus in your mind? But should we leave number of things: energy, transport, a number of other things. And we have to only bring back the issue of human development that can only be focused. You have another thing in your mind. And last thing which I want to urge to Dr. Salari to talk about it, for SDPI for a long time under his leadership, SDPI was the secretariat of Imagine New South Asia initiative. Can SDPI revive that initiative again? Thank you.
I'll also take Mariam's question before we proceed to the answers.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you for the wonderful presentations by the presenters. My question is directly to Prakash, where he was mentioning that there are less than 100 cases of coronavirus in Nepal. I just wanted to know that what is the status of monitoring of corona in different areas? Because in some of the developing countries, the reason of low number of affected people is also because the testing is very low.
Thank you, Mariam. Dr. Zahid?
Thank you, Shakil. I definitely very much recall our encounter outside of the SAARC Secretariat in Tamil in 2009 when I met you and Dr. Salari. So thanks for reminding about that, wonderful coincidence. And about my point, I was more thinking in terms of where things went wrong for SAARC in terms of its institutional development. I was thinking that when it started its journey away from issues of human development to cooperation and other issues that are highly politicized, issues like, for example, terrorism and drug trafficking. For that, there are two SAARC initiatives in Colombo. SAARC Energy Center in Islamabad, highly politicized issue again, because we know of the Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline and all of that. So what I was saying that it has to, under the current situation, and also considering this impasse faced by the organization, it's very important to sort of redirect its focus towards human development issues, considering also the issues of funding and also when organizations set up these initiatives that are basically ineffective, for example, on terrorism and drug trafficking and so on, it just opens more doors for criticism. And SAARC's key success was actually in the area of human development. And that's my recommendation, that it should sort of consolidate its efforts in that area to revive all member states' interest in regional cooperation in South Asia.
Mr. Prakash?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. And actually, I was just going through the statistics, and so far, our total population is around 30 million, and out of that, 13,640 people went through this PCR test, and around 51,000 went through this RDT test. So because the testing started a little bit late, because of the lack of the facility in all parts of the country. So so the level of test is still low. But the decision, the government decision to announce lockdown and stop all international flights, and also sealing these Nepal India border, because we have an open border with India, and so sealing this border or the monitoring these borders, that greatly supported to have less number of cases. But you're right, the testing still needs to be done among the larger population, and that is happening quite rapidly in some of the high risk areas.
Okay, there is a question by Hania Shah. She wanted to ask, given the issue of accumulated debt stocks in South Asia, what policy advice or immediate measures should be suggested to tackle the debt relief or deferral of debt payments at regional level? What could be done to make South Asia's sovereign debt sustainable?
Thank you. I think already, Dr. Soleri, of course, is a far more renowned expert on these issues and will comment on that perhaps in his concluding remarks. As far as my opinion is concerned, many of the South Asian countries have already asked for, deferral of their debt repayments, for example, from IMF and World Bank, and also with China. Pakistan has been actually in negotiations with China and other countries with regard to, Belt and Road Initiative. So that's already happening. And what could be done to make South Asia sovereign debt sustainable? I don't know about that question at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was extremely learning experience for me listening to all the experts from South Asia and also those who are sitting in Australia. Of course, if we look at the country experience of responding to COVID-19, so within our limitations, both economic limitations, the policy space limitation, as well as due to our socio-economic circumstances, the response in all the SAARC countries are more or less similar. Some of the countries, they are more lucky that the pandemic hasn't dropped them as it has to many other countries. But there are certain things which are, I think one can see coming as a common threat, and perhaps that can be an entry point for regional cooperation. One, of course, was discussed is about the food security and food supply chain. The second is cooperation around health issues, not only around our medical infrastructure, but also try to understand health data, how this disease and its pandemic is spreading across South Asia, what sort of the recovery trends, the fatality trends, and again, fortunately or incidentally, why our fatality is much less than rest of the world, what sort of advantages do we have, genetic or other advantages. I think understanding all those trends is an important in order to deal with this pandemic in a more scientific manner. And then, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, this balancing lives and livelihoods, how different countries and different states, they are taking the decision on lockdown, which sectors to relax, which sectors to strictly lock down. Again, some sort of sharing of experiences on those decisions that would help all countries across South Asia. And I agree very much. Shakil reminded about my comments on SAARC. We keep on saying that SAARC is a useless organization, but then we also know that if SAARC is not there, keeping the polarity in the region, we will never be able to have an organization like SAARC. So SAARC's absence, that would create a huge negative effect. So I think we need to make the most of SAARC presence, and we know even if SAARC is dysfunctional, but there are certain mechanisms and certain instruments and certain working groups within SAARC which keeps on meeting and which keeps on pondering on region's future. So perhaps we need to focus on them. We need to take sectoral issues to begin with. If we can't have SAARC as a region agree on something, so perhaps there can be an alliance on health, an alliance on climate change, an alliance on food security, an alliance on social sector development, an alliance on universal social protection. And all of these alliances, as Professor Siri Hajik was mentioning in his remarks, one is state-to-state alliance, other is people's alliances, and alliances at citizen and community level. So maybe we need to strengthen those alliances in this time of pandemic and try to imagine a new South Asia, which can be pandemic-free and which can be poverty-free, which can be more resilient to climate change, and which which can dream together, dream of universal social protection. And all of this can be possible if we start looking at opportunities which can come through this crisis. Thank you very much, all the experts, for guiding us, and we will definitely keep this momentum together, and we will keep on conducting many more such deliberations where we can bring all those experts from across South Asia and beyond together, and we can think of some common policy recommendation that we can give to our governments. Thank you very much for joining us.